Well, on a more personal note, I don't know if I'm supposed to share this or not. Just kind of every morning I try to spend a little bit of time with the Lord, and I just think about anybody, anything, anyone that has hurt me, and just start with. There's times where there are enemies out there that I visualize.
After months of speculation and silence, Joni Lamb finally opened up on live TV, and what she shared left viewers stunned. In a raw and emotional moment, the Daystar host revealed personal battles she's kept hidden for years. No scripts, no filters, just truth. Her words were heavy, her voice shaken, and the reaction was immediate. Is this the beginning of healing or something deeper unraveling? It started off like a vulnerable moment, a rare glimpse behind the public image. On a recent episode of Ministry Now, Joni Lamb opened up in a way that felt deeply personal. She admitted something that many people, especially in Christian leadership, rarely talk about. She said she was struggling, not just with stress or leadership pressure, but with emotions like discouragement, even depression, and feelings of being stuck. She talked about how every morning she takes time alone with God. In that quiet space, she said she reflects on anyone who's hurt her, whether it's a family member, a friend, or even an enemy. And then she makes the choice to forgive them, one by one. She said it's not always easy. Some wounds go deep. Some people are hard to forgive. But every day, she chooses to let it go, to release them, to keep her heart clean before God. For a lot of people watching, this was powerful, honest, refreshing. It felt like Joni was letting people see the human side of her, the side that cries, that struggles, that wrestles with forgiveness, just like everyone else. But then something happened. As the clip spread online, the comments started flooding in. At first, it was support. Then it turned into questions. And then, frustration. Because while Joni was talking about forgiving enemies on national television, there was one relationship she didn't mention. One relationship that had been on the minds of many Daystar viewers for months. Her broken relationship with her son, Jonathan Lamb. To people on the outside looking in, something didn't add up. Here was a woman talking about the power of forgiveness, about releasing offense, about walking in healing. But at the same time, her own son and daughter-in-law were no longer part of Daystar, no longer part of the family ministry, and no longer seen together publicly. People started asking, if Joni is making it a daily habit to forgive people, even enemies, then why hasn't she reconciled with her own son? It's not that people were trying to be cruel or stir up drama. It was more that the disconnect felt too big to ignore. The very core of her message was about forgiveness, about doing the hard, heart-level work of releasing hurt. But from the outside, it seemed like the most personal hurt of all. Her relationship with Jonathan was being avoided, or worse, pushed aside. Longtime Daystar viewers noticed the tension. Some even remember Joni's past episodes where she spoke passionately about family unity, about honoring your children, and about Marcus's vision for Jonathan's future leadership. And now, all of that felt like it had vanished without explanation. So when Joni talked about forgiveness in such an emotional way, it didn't land the way it used to. Instead of healing hearts, it raised eyebrows. People didn't just want to hear about forgiveness, they wanted to see it lived out. Especially when it came to her own family. Especially when it came to a son who, not long ago, was expected to carry on the legacy of the ministry she and Marcus built together. And that's where the disconnect became painful. Because the words were right, the message was powerful, but the missing piece was obvious. Until that relationship is addressed, until there's honesty, reconciliation, or at the very least, acknowledgement, many viewers will continue to struggle with what feels like a public message that doesn't match the private reality. And for some, it's not just disappointing, it's heartbreaking. If you followed Daystar for any length of time, especially during the years when Marcus Lamb was alive, you probably remember how often he talked about his son, Jonathan. It wasn't just in passing or as a proud dad showing off his kid. Marcus spoke with clear conviction that Jonathan was the one called to carry on the ministry. To many viewers, Marcus wasn't just hoping Jonathan would take over one day, he was speaking it like a prophetic promise, like a legacy passed from father to son, in line with the biblical model of spiritual inheritance. Jonathan wasn't just being positioned for leadership, he was being prepared, shaped, and trained from the time he was young. Marcus would bring him on stage, into leadership meetings, onto broadcasts. It was subtle sometimes, but it was clear. Jonathan was the next in line. The mantle would pass to him. That's how Marcus saw it. And many in the Daystar audience believed it too. So when Marcus passed away in 2021, the assumption was simple. Jonathan would step into his father's role. It felt right. It felt biblical. It felt like what Marcus had always planned. At first, it even seemed like that's what was happening. Jonathan remained active on the network. He and his wife Susie were visible, involved, and speaking publicly about their continued commitment to the ministry. They weren't demanding anything or making a big deal about the transition. They were just serving faithfully, honoring Marcus's legacy, and trying to follow God's direction. But as time went on, something changed. Slowly, quietly, Joni Lamb began to take more control. And not just as Marcus's widow trying to keep things going. She became the face, voice, and decision-maker of Daystar. For many, it was a surprise. For some, it was confusing. And for those who had followed Marcus for years, it was deeply concerning. Because to them, this wasn't just a new chapter. This was a detour from the original calling. Jonathan wasn't disappearing. He was still around, still respectful, still involved, but his role began to shrink. His voice wasn't as loud, his face wasn't as visible, and behind the scenes, as Jonathan and Susie would later share, things were getting harder. They started to notice changes. Decisions were being made without them. Conversations were happening behind closed doors. When they asked questions, they were met with silence. Or worse, seen as rebellious. What used to feel like a family-led ministry was starting to feel like a one-person operation. And that person wasn't Jonathan. It wasn't just about ego or position. That's not what this was ever about for Jonathan. He had no desire to force leadership. He just wanted to serve where God had called him. But what he began to experience was something much heavier. He began to feel pushed out, not just from decision-making, but from the very vision his father had passed down to him. And people noticed. Longtime Daystar supporters started asking, "Where's Jonathan?" They remembered Marcus's words. They remembered the way he spoke about legacy and succession. And now, they were watching that legacy slip through the cracks. Or worse, be ignored altogether. Some said they couldn't shake the feeling that what Marcus had prayed for, prepared for, and prophetically declared was being dismantled in real time. It became even more painful when Jonathan and Susie spoke up, when they finally shared what they had been going through behind the scenes. That the ministry Marcus built with love, prayer, and faith had become a place of pressure, secrecy, and control. That instead of being welcomed into leadership, they were gradually being pushed out. And the hardest part? Jonathan had never asked for the spotlight. He had only ever wanted to walk in the footsteps his father laid out. But when he tried to stay true to that vision, to speak up for what he believed was right, to follow God's leading, not just human expectation, he was told that wasn't acceptable, and eventually he was let go. The son Marcus raised to lead, removed from the ministry Marcus built. That's why for many viewers, this whole story isn't just a family feud. It's a spiritual heartbreak, because it feels like a calling was cut off, like a father's vision was overridden, or like a mantle was passed down and then dropped. Some people believe it can still be restored, that healing is still possible, that Marcus's dream isn't dead, just delayed. They still hold on to hope that Jonathan will return, and that Joni will recognize that legacy isn't something you control, it's something you honor. But right now, the picture is painful. A mother and son divided, a calling left unanswered, and a legacy once so clear, now covered in silence. Whatever happens next, one thing is certain. Marcus Lamb's vision for Jonathan wasn't just a nice idea. It was a plan, a promise, and a spiritual inheritance. And until that's acknowledged, there will always be a sense that something holy was set aside, and the Lamb family and Daystar are still feeling the weight of that loss. At first, it just felt like growing pains. That's how Jonathan and Susie Lamb tried to explain it to themselves in the beginning. After all, losing Marcus Lamb had shaken their whole world. The family, the ministry, the vision, it all felt like it had been flipped upside down. Everyone was grieving. Everyone was adjusting. And for a while, Jonathan and Susie believed that if they stayed faithful, stayed humble, and stayed committed to the call, everything would eventually settle into place. But instead of settling, things began to slowly unravel. From the outside, Daystar still looked the same. The lights were on, the shows were running, the brand was intact. But behind the scenes, Jonathan and Susie began to feel something they had never felt before, inside the ministry they had always loved. Unwelcome, untrusted, and unheard. It didn't happen all at once. It was subtle at first. A leadership meeting they weren't invited to. A decision made without their input. Moments where they'd raise a concern, and be met with silence, or worse, with spiritual language that made it sound like they were the problem just for asking. Then it got louder. According to Jonathan and Susie, the culture inside Daystar started to shift in a direction they didn't recognize. It wasn't about vision or collaboration anymore, it was about control. And at the center of that control, they say, was Joni Lamb. They began to notice how people around them seemed afraid to speak up. Staff members would whisper their concerns privately, but never voice them in meetings. People started saying things like, just stay quiet, or don't push back, just agree. It wasn't just unhealthy, it was spiritually suffocating. Jonathan, who had always grown up believing that truth and transparency were core values in Christian leadership, found himself facing a wall made of unspoken rules and unchallenged authority. And the more he tried to bring up concerns, the more it became clear challenging Joni wasn't allowed. Susie saw it too. She described it as walking on eggshells, not just with staff, but even within the family. There was a growing sense that everything needed to revolve around Johnny's approval, her decisions, her opinions, her direction. Questioning her wasn't treated as dialogue. It was seen as disloyalty, even dangerous. And what made it worse? This wasn't just corporate pressure. This was pressure in the name of God. That's what really started to break them down. According to their testimony, Joni's leadership wasn't just strong, it was spiritualized. People were told that what she said was not just wise, but divinely inspired. That her direction wasn't just her opinion, it was God's will. And if you didn't follow it, then you were resisting God himself. That's where Jimmy Evans came in, someone Jonathan and Susie had once respected, a spiritual leader, a marriage counselor, a man of God. But in that infamous July 2023 meeting, something shifted. What was supposed to be a family conversation turned into a spiritual power play. According to Jonathan and Susie, Jimmy told Jonathan that Joni's voice was the voice of God in their family and in the ministry. That resisting her wasn't just disrespect, it was rebellion against God's authority. That if he didn't submit, he was out of alignment not just with his mother, but with the Lord. Jonathan was stunned. Susie felt sick to her stomach. How had it come to this? How had leadership turned into a kind of spiritual control? They described that season as one filled with confusion, emotional pressure, and deep spiritual conflict. They wanted to stay faithful. They wanted to be part of Daystar's future. But they were being asked to surrender their convictions, stay silent, and agree to decisions they didn't believe were right. And when they didn't, the backlash came swiftly. They say the culture inside Daystar had turned toxic. People were being silenced. Some staff were reportedly told not to speak to Jonathan and Susie. Others were removed quietly. Loyalty wasn't measured by faithfulness to God. It was measured by compliance to leadership, specifically to Joni. Then came the issue of Joni's remarriage to Doug Weiss. Jonathan and Susie didn't make a public scene. They didn't post angry videos or write open letters. Instead, they simply chose to stay silent, feeling that the situation raised serious biblical concerns for them personally. They hoped their silence would be respected as a private matter of conviction. But according to them, that silence was taken as betrayal. Soon after, they were both fired from the ministry. Not reassigned, not asked to step back, fired. To Jonathan and Susie, it didn't feel like a professional decision. It felt like punishment, like they were being erased for not falling in line with an internal system that demanded total agreement, not thoughtful engagement. But even all of that, the silence, the pressure, the firing, pales in comparison to what came next. Because according to their account, there was something even more serious, a deep family betrayal that changed everything forever. They say that when a serious allegation of inappropriate behavior involving their young daughter was brought forward, an allegation involving someone close to the Lamb family and employed at Daystar, Johnny's response wasn't what they had hoped for. Instead of open support or urgent protection, they say Joni covered it up. They allege that Joni chose to protect the image of the ministry over the safety of a child, that she dismissed their pain, that she stood by the person accused and made Jonathan and Susie feel like they were the problem. At that point, everything changed. This wasn't about leadership anymore. This wasn't about who would run Daystar. This was about family, safety, truth, justice. Jonathan and Susie say they felt abandoned and betrayed by someone who should have protected them, by someone who had preached about forgiveness, love, and integrity in front of millions. They were done Done with the games, done with the control, and with the spiritual abuse disguised as leadership. What had once been their home, their calling, and their life's work was now the place that broke their hearts. And yet, despite all of it, Jonathan and Susie have chosen not to attack, not to scream, not to try to destroy. Instead, they've started to share their story. Slowly, carefully, honestly. They say they're doing it to shine a light, not just for themselves, but for anyone who has experienced spiritual manipulation, for anyone who has been silenced by leaders they trusted, for anyone who has felt the pain of being told, submit or leave, and perhaps most of all, they're doing it for their daughter. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters most. And for the people watching all of this unfold, those who grew up watching Daystar, those who respected Marcus and believed in his vision, the question now isn't just who's in charge. The question is, how much damage has already been done? And can anything sacred still be saved? When everything first began to surface, the stories, the tension, the quiet fallout inside the Lamb family, many people didn't know what to believe. After all, this was Daystar. This was the ministry they had trusted for years. This was the Lamb family, who had built a platform that reached millions of viewers with the message of faith, hope, and truth. So when Jonathan and Susie Lamb started quietly stepping back from the public eye, people were curious, but they weren't alarmed, at least, not yet. But as time passed, more details started to leak out. Whispers became conversations. Conversations turned into online discussions. And suddenly, what had once felt like private family business was now front and center for thousands of Daystar supporters and Christian viewers around the world. And the reactions, they were loud, emotional, and divided. Some people immediately took to social media to express their sadness. They couldn't believe that the same network that preached about unity, legacy, and family was now the center of such obvious brokenness. Many remembered watching Jonathan grow up on screen. They remembered Marcus talking about his son with pride, almost prophetically, saying he believed Jonathan would carry the mantle one day. So when they learned Jonathan had not only been removed from leadership but allegedly cut off entirely, it felt like a betrayal, not just to him, but to Marcus's legacy. Other people tried to defend Joni Lamb. They argued that leadership transitions are never easy, that grief changes people, that maybe there were things going on behind the scenes that the public just couldn't understand. And that's fair, up to a point. But the more that came out, the allegations of spiritual control, the pressures to submit, the shocking account involving their daughter, and the way it was all allegedly handled, the harder it became to look away. The excuses no longer held up. The story had grown too painful, too real, too serious. Daystar viewers began asking hard questions. How could a ministry that preached about truth be silent on this? How could a network known for transparency suddenly seem so closed off? And how could Joni Lamb talk so passionately about forgiveness and emotional healing while remaining publicly estranged from her own son? People felt torn. Some were angry, others were heartbroken. But the one thing they all had in common was this. They noticed. The disconnect between the public image and the private reality had become impossible to ignore. And once that veil had been lifted, there was no putting it back. Many longtime supporters started sharing their own thoughts online. Some wrote blog posts, others made YouTube videos. Some just commented under Daystar's social media posts, expressing confusion, sadness, and disappointment. They weren't just asking about Jonathan. They were asking about truth, about leadership, about accountability. Some said that if Daystar wanted to continue to be a voice for the Christian world, it had to start living by the same values it preached. That meant honesty. That meant reconciliation. And most of all, it meant putting integrity over image. And for many, the most glaring issue was still Marcus Lamb's vision. For years, viewers had watched him pour his life into the ministry. He wasn't just a CEO or a television host. He was a father, a pastor, and a man who genuinely believed that Daystar would one day be carried forward by his son. He said it publicly, he said it privately, and he said it with conviction. To see that vision ignored, or worse, undone, after his passing, was painful for those who had stood by the ministry for decades. Many of those viewers have now started to call for something more than statements. They're calling for change. They believe Daystar needs to return to the vision Marcus cast. A vision rooted in legacy, not control. In family, not favoritism. In humility, not hierarchy. Some are calling for Jonathan's return, not for drama or revenge, but because they believe it's right. They believe it honors Marcus. They believe it restores balance. And above all, they believe it's the only way healing can truly begin. At the same time, they're asking Joni Lamb to practice what she preaches. If she believes in forgiveness, show it. If she believes in restoration, start with her own family. If she believes in God's timing, trust that maybe this isn't just a crisis. Maybe it's a wake-up call. But so far, Joni has remained mostly silent. Her public appearances continue. Her shows air as usual. But the pain behind the scenes lingers. And the questions remain unanswered. And the longer that silence goes on, the louder the public outcry grows. There's no denying it anymore. The future of Daystar is uncertain. Not because the cameras have stopped rolling, but because the foundation has been shaken. The unity that once held the Lamb family together has cracked. And the trust that viewers once had is slowly slipping away. No one knows exactly what comes next. Will Joni respond publicly? Will there be reconciliation? Will Jonathan ever return to the ministry his father prepared him for? All of that remains unclear. But one thing is certain. This isn't just about a ministry scandal or a leadership dispute. This is about a family, a legacy, and a choice. The choice to either keep up appearances or to face the truth, seek forgiveness, and start the hard work of rebuilding. One honest conversation at a time. And for now, thousands of people are watching, hoping and praying that someone, anyone, will take that first step.